Hello everybody and welcome to this Apala video. My name's Sarath Ranganathan and it's my great pleasure today to be joined by Trevor Duke. Welcome, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Trevor is the head of the Centre for International Child Health at the University of Melbourne in Australia and has written and published a paper called How to Do a Postgraduate Research Project and Write a Minor Thesis, which Trevor has kindly given us access to. So I do hope that you'll find reading that very valuable. I'd like to ask Trevor some questions around this today. First of all, Trevor, what was the need for this particular publication?
Yeah, well, over the years, I've supervised a lot of postgraduate research students, and most of them are clinicians, and many of them haven't had a lot of training in research along the way, along their clinical training, but they're required to do some sort of research project as part of their training. And I've seen the same pitfalls, I guess, year after year, and the same challenges in people doing clinical research. So I just thought, and I looked I did a search for any guidance, and there really is very little guidance on how to do research at that level. Yeah.
I would agree with that, and I certainly learnt a lot from reading the paper. It's an excellent sort of guide to how to get a project done or write a thesis. I wondered if you could take us through it a little bit, perhaps starting by how we could get started in a research project.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think postgraduate students find hardest to do is to turn their good ideas into an answerable research question. Everybody's got good ideas. They've seen lots of clinical material or public health material, so they've got a good idea or a theme they want to research. But turning that into an answerable research question is the first step. And so I generally go through with students how to do that and how to then formulate a research question and then think about the appropriate methodology that goes with that research question. And in the process, try to teach people about all the different methodologies of research, even if that particular method, theirs is only one methodology.
I think in that section you talk about quantitative and qualitative research methods, or sometimes where you use both. You say a little bit more about those two types of methodologies?
Yeah, increasingly I've seen people at that level who are doing postgraduate clinical research do mixed method quantitative and qualitative research projects. And I think increasingly qualitative research is important because it can tell us why things are the way they are, why people act in the way they do, why treatments work in some populations and not in others. And so I think while the traditional way of teaching research has been very much teaching quantitative research, I think it's possible for people who are relatively inexperienced in research to learn about basic qualitative methods and incorporate that into their projects.
Now, one of the important things when an individual has a research question is to actually know whether or not that's been answered before, perhaps by someone else. And you talk about doing a literature review. Yeah. So when's the best time to do a literature review if you're trying to frame a research question?
I think it's useful to do it early, although I do see that many students focus a lot on their literature review and they spend quite a long time on that and actually don't get around to thinking about the methodology of their project. So I tend to encourage people to do a literature review early just to get a feel for the lie of the land in terms of research and to understand if their project is advancing the science in some small way, either in their own country, as in it's not been done before, or in general, that it's not been done before, and to see what the methodologies that other people have used and to consider whether those methodologies are appropriate for their situation. But I tend not to encourage people to spend a lot of time on the literature review because for most of these postgraduate research projects, people have a relatively finite amount of time, and I think it's good to get on with the project itself.
And what's your view on the role of ethics in all of this?
Well, I think it's someone who does a postgraduate research project needs to go through an ethics process, just like they need to go through every process in the entire research process. And I think it can teach you a great deal about ethics, actually, just putting a paper through the ethics process. So it's required by almost by all universities and all jurisdictions to put a research project through ethics, but it can also be a good learning experience as well. Yeah.
Now, we don't do research alone, and in here you also comment on how to build that relationship with your supervisor.
Yes.
So any tips on that?
Well, the supervisors that I deal with are often busy clinicians, and they may or may not be very focused on research, and sometimes they're focused on their own research. But most of the people I work with are busy clinicians, and they also might not have had a lot of experience with research. So I think the student needs to be engaging with their supervisor on a regular basis, and even if the supervisor doesn't engage with them, they need to be encouraging the supervisor and keeping the supervisor informed so that they feel a part of the research project, just as it's the case that other clinicians or other people around them in a ward or in a hospital need to feel a part of the research. So engaging people is very important in research.
Trevor, assuming the research has become successful, you've got some data. How are we going to manage the data? What do we do with that data?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important that students plan their data gathering and their data entry very early, because if you can develop a good database early, then you can test as you're going the analyzability of the data and the database, and ensure that it can answer the question that you originally set out to answer. And I think the biggest one mistake people make is not entering their data until right towards the end. So your data collection forms need to be linked to your database, as in they need to be consistent with it, aligned with it, and your database needs to be analyzable to be able to answer the question you set out to answer.
And what would constitute a database? I mean, is that an Excel spreadsheet?
It can be something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, but one problem I see people make is, for example, not fully understanding the way data needs to be entered to be analyzable. So, for example, they might enter the weight in kilograms for one child and grams for another, and with 2 or 3 decimal points for another. And so understanding that how statistical analysis works, that you need to have uniformity in the way a uniformity of the metrics that you're entering, I think is important.
Now, let's assume then we've gone past that. We've got wonderful data, we've analysed it, and we're ready to write up. Now, you've provided in your paper some very practical approaches towards writing up a minor thesis, or even potentially a major thesis. So could you take us through that? Because for many people, that's a really hard undertaking.
Yeah. I think one first thing is that people should, it's not mandatory, but I find it useful to have one master document. If you have a number of documents, one that was the proposal, one that was the funding proposal, one that was the one that's a working document, and then you write your thesis, then it's a bit of a inefficient process. Whereas I think if you have one master document that you can modify, then it always remains up to date. So if you add a new graph or you add a new paragraph, then it's changed in your master document. So the first thing is to have a master document that you have. Secondly, I think you need to be writing regularly. You need to write every week. I mean, many people they come to a sort of block and they wait for a month or 2 without doing anything to their project or their writing, and that can lead to you then lose the thread of what you're doing. So even if you write a small amount each week, at least write something each week. The first difficulty is getting started, and I always tell people they've actually started by writing their proposal, and you can use your proposal as the basis for your master document. So instead of the block of I don't know how to write a thesis, you can use your proposal to do that. Yeah.
Look, I think that's fantastic advice. Anything else for people who might be about to undertake their minor thesis right now?
Yeah. Well, I think that when you're writing, think in a simple way. Like remember that the introduction is why you did the study. The method is what you did. The results are what you found, and the discussion is what it means. And if you think about it in those terms, then I think it's easier to write. I always encourage people to have to try to have an analysis plan, and so that way you can test your database and see if it can analyze the data and answer the questions you set out to answer. And it's useful to develop dummy tables in your thesis where you put a table in that doesn't have any data in it, but at least you've outlined how you're going to present your data. So an analysis plan and dummy tables are keys, I think, to writing the results.
Well, thank you very much, Trevor. I think that was really worthwhile and very helpful. And I think the advice that you've given there and also published are very relevant to all research that we do, including PhD theses and all the research and how we write it up. So it's very, very helpful. And to everyone else, I hope you enjoy reading this publication that Trevor's kindly made available to all the APALA participants this year. Thanks very much.